Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Success Series presented by Manulife, Emerging Trends Through the Pandemic. My name is Ian McLean, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's virtual event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you'll join us in fostering a positive environment here today that is a safe and welcoming space for all. We know that there is more that we can do, and we are committed to listening, learning, and growing as we go. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors. So a special thank you today to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. These organizations and many others are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. Just before the session starts, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce any background noise. If you have a tech-related question, please comment in the chat section, and a representative of our team will get back to you momentarily. If you have a question for today's speakers, they will be gathered throughout the session, and our speakers will do their best to answer as many of these questions as possible throughout the presentation. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I'd like to now introduce today's guests, Rob Grein and Andrea Hosefield. Andrea joined the PMG team in 2019 and is based in Victoria, BC. In her role as Senior Director, Research and Analysis, she provides consulting services on selected projects and oversees the data collection operations team. She brings 30 plus years of experience to the research consulting business. Prior to joining PMG, she directed the corporate research function at IGM Financial. In this role, Andrea served as the internal consultant supporting the research requirements of various divisions, departments within the IGM organization. Her expertise was in providing insights in qualitative studies, as well as partnering with research suppliers to oversee various research programs with advisors, clients, and financial services consumers. Rob Grein is the founding partner and president with PMG Intelligence, the company he launched in 1993. His entire career has been focused in the field of market research and data science. He has had the opportunity to lead, direct, and support a variety of strategic and research initiatives and behavioral research projects in financial services, healthcare, and risk management industries, among others. His expertise and that of his team has been sought by private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. Over the past two plus decades, Rob has had the opportunity to speak with and educate public, corporate, academic, and non-for-profit industry partners at a strategic level, and has played an active committee role with client organizations by facilitating and implementing research, data, and data-driven technologies. So welcome to both of you. Want to just say how pleased I am to have you join us today. We, I guess no secret, I guess we should disclose this. Rob, you've done some work for, or PMG has done work for the Chamber for recently, and actually dating back we were trying to figure this out just before we went on air, about 12 years ago, just prior to my arrival at the Chamber. You'd done another big research project, get a sense of our members, what their needs were, and what they were thinking about at the macro level 12 years ago. And we've just kind of come back to that now, especially after COVID, which is perfectly timed. But I wanted to disclose that. But tell me this a little bit. I always think it's interesting to hear some of the cool stories, especially for Waterloo Region businesses. Tell me the PMG story. Why did you start here? And a lot of people always question, why did you stay here? Even though Andrea has chosen to be in BC, mountains, ocean, whatever. But my parents are there.
In Winnipeg.
Well, there you go. Well, that's true. My dad's from Victoria, so I'm partial to it as well. But tell me why Waterloo and why you stayed.
A great question. Waterloo always felt like home. It's where my wife and I raised our kids. It's where our company was started. It's where my entire volunteer journey began. And I, for whatever reason, even though there are days as I look forward to the future where I think or contemplate the possibility of leaving, I can never arrive at a place of comfort where that would actually ever happen. And so I'm here, and I and our team are just so very grateful for the opportunity to provide and share some of our data, some of our experience, and just want to help. So thank you.
Well, okay, so let's go, and we're going to come to why Andrea is in the middle of the country for a Ontario-based company, because I think that one of the things that's going to come out of this first question is I think everything has changed for business in one way, shape, or form since the start of COVID. But maybe Rob, and I know you've got some slides. You feel free when you've got some that you're important to share with our group or for those that will watch after. Just I think you've got control, because if I've got control of this this podcast, Lord help us. But you bring that up when you need to. But I guess the first question is, I mean, it says what's the most significant change that COVID has brought, but I genuinely think I'm not sure there is much that hasn't changed for a small business owner. But walk us through that. I mean, what is going to be the more ephemeral changes, and what are going to be the things that are going to stick?
Yeah, it's another great question. It's interesting. In our journey, we started out as a research, like as a market research company. So a lot of the work we did was in primary research, and that really involves things like surveys, focus groups, and that sort of thing. And what we learned, what we were learning at a fast rate in the 90s and up to the turn of the century, was that it was interesting. The way people would respond to surveys, there was this forming consistency, and it really forced us to think about research in the context of human psychology. Now, I don't want to bore anyone with a psychology 101 discussion, but what's really interesting in our work, and to your question, Ian, to your comment and to your question, is that when we think about the impact of COVID, we first have to put it into the context of these really, for an old guy, I'm going to use the word cool, I probably shouldn't, but we essentially reference our quantitative research against models that have been created. An example of a model that many may be familiar with would be Myers-Briggs. It's personality profiling. So we have our own personality profiling model and methodology. The other would be Maslow's hierarchy. So what happens to people as they journey through life and in their goal to self-actualize? And so it's just so fascinating to us. Since 93, we'll start in 98, we track the impact of a major market correction. For those that can remember, 2008, significant market correction. We've done research around the time of health events, SARS, H1N1 as an example. It was interesting. You see this little blip where people would change for a short period of time, but it goes back to that old adage that we're very familiar with, and that is people are creatures of habit. To change a behavior, it requires a fairly significant event. So generally speaking, a meaningful segment of the Canadian population, consumers, people, business owners, they some change minimally, some change dramatically. And an example, and just a really quick example of that and how this is affecting small business today is, I'm going to do a real quick screen share, and hopefully this provides for our audience an example of how substantive changes are for how businesses are operating, or modifying through COVID. So this slide, and hopefully I'm sure I'll be told if you
There you
can't
go.
see it. There we go. Perfect.
Perfect.
So this slide has been such a focal point for us in our 2-year journey in modeling the long-term impact of COVID in the long-term impact that COVID is having on business owners. Some businesses have fundamentally changed. They are thinking about succession planning today when perhaps many are thinking about succession planning today when that was considered to be in a long-term time horizon. Others are acting and behaving like it's business as usual. It's not homogenous. There are these really interesting segments at a business level and at a person and at a people level, and how they're adapting to change. And so really important, there are 2 types of decisions that people make. There are habit-directed decisions and goal-directed decisions. A habit-directed decision is a decision that we make without acknowledgement. We're on autopilot. These 30,000+ decisions that we people and business owners make every day. And then we have goal-directed decisions. So we stop, pause, evaluate. I mentioned that over time and studying the impact of major market volatility or volatility events and health and specific health crisis, that typically we see a return to normal. Like, how often have we heard that through COVID, right? It's the new normal. And now we hear the return to normal. What COVID is different. COVID's a bit of a different animal because now you're intersecting health and financial stressors. And very similar to that whole thing, we're creatures of habit. If you instill a change for a elongated period of time, then over time, a behavior will modify. It's very similar to if a family member or a friend or us personally, if we have experience a health event, that will cause a trigger to perhaps change how we think about diet, exercise, so on and so forth. Business owners are no different. If you insert a stressor, and if the stressor is important, that stressor, if it crosses a certain threshold, will make a business owner who's perhaps very strong, like they're an entrepreneur by nature, but perhaps the time they spend planning in their business could be increased. What COVID is doing is it's taking a non-natural behavior with many and forcing them to engage in things like business planning, succession planning. That for us has been the most fundamental shift that we've seen in COVID, and it's sticking for many. So yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic because we've been studying people for so long, like for almost 3 decades now. And this is one of the first events where it's actually causing changes.
I mean, this is my analogy, even for our own staff, and trying to figure out what the return to normal looked like, or though we stopped calling it that, saying post-COVID, was in many cases, and I think you're right, in other things like H1N1 SARS, it was like an elastic band. It changed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to go back to the same shape. I'm not convinced that we're going back to the same shape elastic that we did in January of 2020. And so, Andrea, I guess you do a lot of this research. Maybe pick up on that, because I mean, here's one of the things that, I mean, my eyes, I was kind of used to say, gee, my eyes can't lie to me. So Kitchener Rangers playing the London Knights in the OHL playoffs would ordinarily be good luck getting a ticket, standing room only. And I'm sure there's something in Western Canada, whether you have, Swift Current or whoever, but it would be one of those rivalries that would be 8,000 people packed to the rafters, can't get a ticket, standing room only. And I was watching the games, and because I was like, I'm not sure I'm ready to go into a big, it couldn't have been, it was probably 60% full, which is still a good crowd in OHL, but it's not what we're used to. And it occurred to me, I watched a couple of games, and then Joe Birch, GMs, offered, because we've done a lot of work with them over the pandemic, said, hey, bring some of your staff. We'd love to have you down here. And I made the offer. My girls, we said, yeah, okay, well, let's go and do that. We went and watched the game because visually it looked like it wasn't full, right? Like we were being a little cautious, but to me, it just looks like that's more of a permanent. I'll make my decision on, am I comfortable going and sitting with 8,000 people? Like, what's the level of because everyone knows that COVID hasn't disappeared. So maybe, I mean, that's just one example, but to me, it was and it kind of came to me over like 5 days of watching playoff hockey and watching it on TV and going, hey, the stadium's not filled. Are those the types of things where you actually see change that isn't elastic, that isn't going to come right back?
Well, that's certainly the case. I mean, we are observing in the consumer marketplace, just there are different people, categories of people, segments of people who are adopting new behaviors, who want that new norm, the old normal, some who want the new normal, and some who are still navigating the stress. And so the other observational offer is that, to Rob's point about other stressors in life have always been short-term. This has been a 2-year stressor on people's physical, emotional, mental well-being that is impacting all of their decisions. And this is something that I don't think has really existed in our society for an ongoing basis, where people are having to make these decisions in such a negative, impactful environment. And so we're learning that people are adopting new ways of doing things. And to your point about crowd size, some are eager to get back and be part of it all. Some let's ease into that, and some never will. They have adopted a new normal.
Well, I guess that's, Robin, if I translate this for, we obviously did the latest study for us as we tried to understand our membership. And this is something our board of directors was, for a couple of years, we kind of put it on hold because of COVID. We didn't want to do it in the height of it when we weren't sure how things had settled out. But when you did this research, I mean, one of the things about a chamber of commerce, I think anywhere across the country, is that it has got a little bit of everything. It's got soup to nuts. It's got small business. It's got the convenience store, the gas bar, the what Andrea's familiar with. It's got all the big banks, financial services, insurance companies, professional service, all the services, restaurants, retail. When you're doing that, at the best of times, it's kind of trying to speak for every sector that we represent is always a bit of a challenge, right? Because we got to say, here's my one answer about what business is feeling in 9 different parts. Because when I talk about small business or retail, it might be different than other sectors. How is this? What are you hearing from when you're doing your surveys now, and how has COVID and coming through the other side affected different business sectors? Because it's not the same. Just like we said, it's not for individuals. Andrea talked about every individual is reacting different to coming out of COVID and what their new normal is, but it must have impacted every business type of business differently as well.
It did. It truly did. I think from our perspective, with all of the analysis and all the data we have access to, the one thing that's interesting, although there are variances by industry sector or industry category, I've always been intrigued by how homogenous the small business owner community is. So even if you are an industry sector who thrived during COVID from a financial perspective versus an organization in an industry, the restaurant industry, that we actually conducted analyses on to understand what the recovery rate is going to look like and where will the restaurant industry be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Small business owners share a very similar plight, and COVID, regardless of impact, COVID affected the lion's share of the small business owner community. And to that point, and the homogeneous nature of how of how those areas where small businesses are the same, it fundamentally is connected to the rate at which they are planning. So even though, again, we recognize the nuance from one industry to another, what COVID has truly disrupted is that internalized behavior of how they're engaging in the business. And the way we typically describe this is, and I think for some of the people that have joined us today that are viewing this session, that it's the difference between working in the business and working on the business. The shift that's been very commonly accepted due to COVID from a behavioral perspective is it's not necessarily removing yourself from day-to-day operations, but being very considerate of where the company is going in the future. And so instead of having that 2,000-foot view, there's been an incredible movement to actually having a 50,000-foot view of the business and looking at it from a completely different lens. That has been the most fundamental shift that we've seen in COVID, regardless of industry sector, regardless of how much the pandemic has affected the finances and the operations of the business. Talent acquisition and retention, that's huge right now. Like, that's the one thing that's coming out of this. If you're in a thriving business, the goal now is to maintain and retain talent. So all industries are being affected. The most global change has been their participation in working again on the business as opposed to in it.
I want to talk about, maybe we'll go here and then come back, because I think there's some unique challenges that come for every business that aren't related to the emergency relief programs that were developed. And I think I spent just about every day for a better part of a year with my colleagues from Best Waterloo, literally every day kind of saying, you need to get these up and running to keep businesses afloat as COVID as we were locked down for longer and longer. But maybe just at the highest level, and I don't know whether both of you can comment on this, because you would have done some research throughout this, but I guess the first part is, a question I have is, what did you discover about how successful the various government relief programs were during it? Like, as opposed to on the other side of saying, well, they must have worked because, and you can qualify it, were they seen to be generally successful by business owners, or how was it perceived by the business community? Because it came in chunks. We had to continue to go back and say, that's not good enough. 10% wage recovery is not going to do anything. Like, it's got to be 80 or 75, 85% if you're going to keep businesses on. And we had to work with government to understand the challenges that small business owners were facing. But what was the view from some of the research you were doing in talking to a variety of businesses as that was unfolding?
I will do a screen share once again.
Okay.
So we studied this very aggressively. The incidence rate of emergency financing programs being utilized was high. So the lion's share of small businesses utilized some level of financial support offered by government. This was met with a higher degree of frequency, there was variation in the degree of frequency based on the industry and based on the company, but the utilization rates were, generally speaking, very high. What's interesting in financial services, if you take financial services, and I'm going to pick on financial services for a moment, because obviously when you think about financial relief, we're going to connect it to financial management and the partners that were there to support throughout. So whether you were a major bank or a credit union or a financial planning organization, regardless of if you're a small business, and now you have to put into context BDC as being a supportive agency, utilization was high. The satisfaction with many of the financial partnerships, so the satisfaction a small business owner had with their primary lending institution actually waned in COVID. So it actually decreased. So incidence of support program utilization was high. Satisfaction declined. Satisfaction with the primary relationship declined.
So I mean, I guess Andrew, I'll go to you on this and get your perspective. I guess one of the things we found is the pandemic really, how you perceive the pandemic and how much, because it affected everybody. People died, people we know got sick. So it did impact everyone. But from a business perspective, how you reacted and how you felt it impacted your business very much depended on the sector you were in. I mean, those numbers you just showed there, if I was doing, now I'm mostly blind, but I think I got enough of the numbers there to see that in the financial services sector, it was almost 3/4 of them said they either didn't qualify or didn't need it. And I would say the mirror opposite, when you get into retail or restaurant, it would be more like 90% the other way, who said,
Correct.
I absolutely need it or I'm not going to survive. So is it true that it was a global pandemic in the macro sense, but how you experienced it was very much dependent on your own personal circumstance as an employee or the sector you're in as a business to how much you were, because how much you were able to be open, whether you could do virtual or curbside, all of those things played in. Is that what it was? If we went through every one of those slides and said, okay, what is it like in insurance or financial services, and then went into retail or restaurants or personal services, that would be a much different take.
It's certainly a fair observation. I mean, even from the point of view of a restaurant, in-person dining was a no-go for a long period of time, but those delivery service businesses were booming. And so the ability to improve your interactions with your clients, consumers, restaurant goers, it changed. The delivery model changed. Literally, the delivery model changed. And so I 100% agree. It depended on the industry you're in and your ability to, I don't like to use this word, pivot. It's been overused, but it's been something that we have had to adopt across all industries, to pivot as fast as possible to meet the needs of consumers. Because business owners are consumers too. Rob commented on the employees and keep retaining talent. There's the notion of the supply chain that's impacted by other employee concerns in other industries, that then the tentacles of the COVID impact spread out beyond just what immediately impacts your individual industry. So it builds upon itself, and agreed, it will vary. Some have had much success in COVID.
Rob, one of the things that and I guess this is a concern that our business, Best Waterloo, the business economic support team, so the two chambers and Communitech and Waterloo EDC and Explore Waterloo, but especially the two chambers and Explore Waterloo have more front-facing, smaller businesses as part of our members or stakeholders, if you will. Debt levels for small business have gone off the charts, because it's one thing to have got the money, but not much of it is free, meaning much of it will have to be paid back. Small businesses already have, by their very definition, usually high levels of debt, because they're it's not like they have huge investors, so they have debt levels which keep them needing to make sure that the cash flow is coming in to keep kind of chugging away at paying down their what I would call normal business debt levels. A lot of these programs, most of them were loans. Is that a concern for businesses, or have they started thinking about what it's going to be like to pay their normal, operating business loans and business lines, and then have to start paying things back like CEBA loans or other loan programs that they've had to utilize in order to kind of get through in those most challenged sectors? Because I think that's one of the risks that we're coming up on is over the next year or two, is many businesses are going to be challenged with paying what effectively is two chunks of debt when they're only used to paying, and their cash flow has been only to support their normal business debt.
One of the wonderful, maybe I'm using the word wonderful inappropriately, but I'm going to use it anyway. One of the wonderful outcomes of COVID has been, I mentioned a moment ago, is the engagement that business owners are having now in their business. So when you think about how the business is financed, and you are 100% correct, all economic modeling shows that small business owners tend to carry per capita higher debt ratio than large organizations, and there's a personal accountability to some of those responsibilities. The grants, the largest grant program, which was connected to CEWS, or wage subsidy, that had a high level of utilization across, regardless of size of the company cohort size. But what's interesting, you kind of hit it on the head, and the one of the big changes that we're seeing, and it gets down to, again, the engagement that companies are having in their business is actually connected to a reduction in the amount of time they spend in day-to-day operations, and an increase in the business from an accounting and finance perspective. So that, yeah, so you're on point. Like that's one of the key areas that we most certainly have been observing. And the second you have a business owner embrace into the finance of the business, then actually very positive things occur. They start looking at their business a little bit differently. No different than consumers in COVID. Pre-COVID, a consumer would look at their house as a home. Coming out of COVID, they look at the house as now being viewed more as a balance sheet item. So they're recognizing hey, this is an asset that I can actually service an ability for me to retire. Business owners are the same. So business owners now are looking at their business, small business owners and self-employed professionals are looking at their business as being an asset. So that engagement in the financial and accounting aspects of their business is actually, in many ways, positive. It's creating a positive approach to how they plan and how they think forward.
Well, it's also moving people from making those, like consumers, habit-directed decisions into goal-directed decisions. Mm-hmm. And so they're having to do more planning. To your comment about how are they going to handle the change in their lending requirements, well, maybe this is when their succession planning comes in, where they didn't have succession planning anymore. And what is the long-term outlook for the business? And I think more and more effort is being put towards that than the just making sure things are running day to day.
That's a good point. I think it leads to, we heard a lot about, and to me, it sounded like it was kind of academic at the time I first started hearing about the Great Retirement, right? And because we were still in the middle of lockdowns. I mean, how would you know if someone retired? Because no one really knows if anyone's working right now. But I think what is true is that there is a huge talent crunch, and that's obvious now that everyone's opening up. As my colleague Michelle at the Explore Waterloo would say, and her predecessor who worked with us for the first couple of years of COVID, Minto Schneider, who was the CEO before her at Explore Waterloo, would say, reopening is not recovery for many businesses. Simply opening the doors means you're kind of at a point in time where you can start to pick up the pieces. And I want to relate this back to talent or supply chains, because those things are things that I think I would imagine you're hearing about, because they impact the ability. If opening up and saying, I've got a restaurant or a personal services business and I want to get my revenue back up to where it is, just gross revenue. I want to make sure people are chugging through the doors, that I'm filling, getting my top line revenue. Reopening doesn't mean recovery, because there's no guarantee the customers are coming back. And in fact, we've seen that in just about every circumstance. It is no business. Some of them are getting back there. We're into summer. We've got patios opening. and when we talk about recoveries, some restaurants who are really well prepared and are fully staffed and have, ability to get all of their supplies in, are saying they're getting towards a lot quicker than many, I might add. But some businesses or restaurants are getting back to, I'm getting back to where it was pre-COVID. But many aren't, and it could take some time, because if you don't have the staff to be able to open full time and stay open for the regular 12 hours, or people are just choosing not to come in and sit in the restaurant. They may still do curbside, they may do whatever, Uber Eats or do delivery. But I guess the question really comes from that is do those other, are you seeing that where it depends on where you sit is how you view the problem or the opportunity? Because I know from personal experience, know many people in the restaurant business. Many of them are great operators, but they're finding it tough because they're just not finding the same demand as they did pre-COVID. Now it's getting better, but it's not there in one fell swoop. But that creates pressure on your business. Your debt levels are up, all of those. Are you finding that in the research that there, and you talked about this, maybe, Rob, it's not homogeneous. It's not like all restaurants say X. There must be a variety of concerns and issues that need to be addressed depending on the size and type of business you are.
100%. I'm gonna steal Minto's reference, because the comment, opening your doors is not recovery. That's so true. That's so on point. Businesses, and they're not homogenous. Businesses have had to find a way to reinvent themselves in many cases, and consumers who, pre-COVID, their eating out expenditure, if 80%, more broadly speaking, was allocated to in restaurant dining. Today, that's shifting, and it's shifting more with segments of the market who are exhibiting not a resiliency to change, but who are embracing change in a different way. And an example of that is, which is so powerful. I used Myers-Briggs as an example because we have our own personality profiling segmentation. What we've been modeling is basically tracking the impact, like how much of an impact is COVID having on how people make decisions. So whether I eat in or I eat out, as an example. And it's this section on the right, those that are embracing changes, especially in that 27% who are adopting. This is the segment that's actually changing. And how we relate to them and how we communicate. So to the marketers in the room, how we think about them, how we relate to them, how we inspire them, they're changing. Because the stressor that Andrew referred to, the stressor has been in effect for such a long period of time that it's, for some, it actually is becoming it's their methodology. Their methodologies are changing.
So does that, just leave that up for a second, Rob, because I'm interested in that. So the adopters aren't people that are saying, oh, we just got to get on with life and get back to normal. They're adopting some of the changes which could fundamentally alter their pattern of how they go shopping, when they go shopping, when they congregate with others. Yeah. Is that what you're saying? Like, so it could be, some have said, I've adopted, I'm vaccinated, I'm ready to go back, and they go back to their normal or want to get fully back. But there's a whole bunch of others who would say, I'm not going to put myself in that position because I've got elderly parents, young kids, take your pick. But they've got their own reasons, but they've adopted how they react in within the economy. Is that what I mean? Because I think that's, and I think on the left hand side you got folks who are saying nothing to see here. Yeah. We're just get back to normal. I'm going back to my exact routine. and that's a smaller group. But they're more likely to want to just go back to the way it was. And on the adopters and the fretters are looking for, okay, how do I feel assurance that whatever we're doing is safe?
Yeah, again, on point, Ian. That's exactly how I would describe it. And I'm pleased, Andrea, just jump in and provide any other kind of your point of view. But there's this interesting level set. The one thing conversations that we've been having is if people who are natural introverts versus an extrovert, right? There's almost this natural realignment to what your personality and what your risk-oriented decision making actually is. And so you have people who, if you're an extrovert and your energy is gained from social dynamic or social interaction, COVID's a stressor. If you are a more natural introvert, then your ability to adapt and to embrace change is going to be very different. And so when we've been asked by our industry partners and by regulators in government to predict what's on the other side of COVID, what we're estimating is we're between 25 to 40% of the market's going to experience on a continuum a change that will be permanent.
And they may demand that change too. They don't want the flexibility of being able to interact online to go away for some. Others, they're eager to ditch these Zoom conversations and be back in person. But it's the understanding that not everybody is the same and that there are these segments of people who want to adopt a new normal and like it. To Rob's point, the introversion versus extroversion. And the other comment I'll offer is that the processing risk in their decision making has been an interesting point of view for us, where the notion of risk has always been, it's uncertainty. But for now, a couple of years, risk has been danger. This is a real shift on the decision-making psyche of what people are choosing. And so, to receive. We see that people just, the sense of danger is declining, but this has an impact on what people choose, how they choose to interact, how they want to continue to interact. And it's becoming less prevalent, but it's still something that would never have been part of the consideration before.
Yeah, it's fascinating. If you were to look at September 2020, June 2020, we had this spike up in association to danger, and that's where some of the modification in human behavior started. And we're seeing, and wonderfully, we are seeing a return to quote unquote normal, where the assessment of danger is now we're moving to, I'll call it a level of security that will make a return, whatever that looks like, possible. And it's funny, we for our work in risk management, an example of danger was just so interesting from a lowly researcher, that is, that the association of danger to pumping fuel at a gas station. So pre-COVID, I was like an autopilot. I would pull my car into a gas station if you're not electric, and you would put gas in your car, and you wouldn't even think about it. It was just an autopilot. There was this really interesting spike in COVID where there was a heightened awareness of the activity of pumping fuel. And those things actually affect and support how we treat the analysis of business owner research, because there is the association or how the internalized risk changed. And for some, again, it's just becoming more permanent.
There's a couple more I want to get to, but I'm interested in maybe going back a little bit to the following. The number in, I guess, if I had to categorize the top three issues that I hear and we're hearing from business, because I think what's true, Randy has talked about, is business, I think there has been some fundamental change about how people want to get together, how they want to do sales, how they want to experience kind of networking through us. Is we're going to have to do it differently. There will be some people who would just say, I like the convenience of being able to do this Zoom. I don't want to always have to do it, but I want to know when my kid's sick that I don't have to not go to the Business After 5 or the Business Success Series, that I can watch it remotely. That changes the way we do business because there's more cost. It's a different dynamic, but we're going to have to be saying we can't go back to relying on everyone coming to a specific place for an event like that. That's just not what our members are they're going to want the flexibility. I think you called it, Andrea. So we're going to have to change the way we do some operations, but so that's for us. And I think that is one of those, that is I think going to be one of the takeaways. But if when I ask them what their challenges right off the like today, most businesses would say, here's my top three: talent. And then they'd say 3B would be inflation, and 3C would be supply chain or cost of goods. But they start with, I can't get people to fill the jobs. And if you don't have people filling the jobs, you can't open properly. And we talked about this in the previous question. You can't fully open if you don't got people. So talent, supply chain, those issues are you seeing that in your research, that's what those are the concerns across sectors? Or again, is that more dependent on the type of business you're in? Because that's certainly what the people that are more concerned, that are talking to us and sharing their views, those are the two issues.
Yeah, it's another great question. There are two moving parts. The first moving part is today's consumer, so coming out of COVID, fingers crossed, that they're more engaged. Like, they want to understand how things work now. So they want that flexibility that Andrew referred to. But it's interesting, they are engaged. For those on the call today that use if you think about your customer journey as an example, kind of as an inflection point. If you think about the customer journey pre-COVID, it's really interesting. Pre-COVID, whether you use a 3, 5, 7 layer model, awareness would be, we could make a pitch, we could basically make an offer, we could advertise, and we had this almost routinized response from the general market. It's Friday night. Let's go to the restaurant we go to every other Friday night. The level of engagement in some of those decisions was actually low. What COVID has actually done is it's inserted this level in the customer journey referred to as pre-engagement. They're stopping, pausing, and evaluating now, like they're engaged. The employer discussion is so interesting because there's two components. One is now, from an employer perspective, is I do have choices. I'm going to engage now. I'm going to be really thoughtful in how I think about my career. Am I happy? And that engagement, COVID inspired that with segments of the market. And sorry, this is going to go really quick here. I'm going to get down to a slide that speaks to your comment, Ian. Trust, the two markers that impact human decision-making will be affected by trust and confidence. So in COVID, for whatever reason, we've seen a decline since 2008. So our tracking goes back many, many years in the level of trust associated to one's employer. Some of that deals to how employers managed COVID, their return to office, strategy. And it's not that employers necessarily treating their employees poorly. It was employees recognizing or now internalizing, well, where do I want to be in 10 years in my career? Is this career where I want to be? And the operational side of the employee-employer relationship is being evaluated. Work from home has an impact on that. And those things can create some conflict with those two key markers, confidence and trust. Andrew, does that make sense to you? Does that sound?
Does make sense too. And the thing is, like, some employers have the ability to respond to the needs of attracting talent better than other employers do. The margins are really thin in the restaurant industry. So the ability to offer an increased wage to compete with other restaurants, it's really hard. And you need to make sure that your food is being delivered. So there's that whole extra layer to be added on to that cost analysis. We go back to people are reviewing the finances of the business, and can we afford to give people an extra raise to be an employer of choice? And so it is very much industry dependent on the talent concerns in terms of acquiring new people and retaining people.
Okay, I'm interested in the following, and from a number of different angles. So we can take this a couple of different ways, but do you think small businesses are changing their professional relationships as a result of COVID? And the reason I ask, that could be with your suppliers, it could be with your staff. I think Andrew, because I recall you have been avoiding moving to Waterloo Region for quite some time. You simply refuse to do it. Many of your own clients would want you to do that, but we can't pressure you to do that. But that you predated this, but I think that there's much more acknowledgement that where your staff are and being able to do work are not the way it was before. We know that people can work remotely, as an example, but are those professional relationships, whether it's with staff or with other suppliers, do you think they fundamentally changed? To me, it feels like it already has. It's only a question of where it's going to settle out and where the new equilibrium is, because it's not going back to the way it was, and it may not stay where we're still working at home. Because for a variety of reasons, some non-COVID related, because we're doing some construction, but we're still working at home. That is not gonna continue for that much longer, but it's not going back to the way it was before. So maybe I don't know how you want to take that one, because there's a couple of different angles to that, but ultimately are the professional relationships and the employee relationships going to change because of COVID on a permanent basis?
The opportunity to change is more active right now. There's more evaluation going on. Is this going to be a permanent change? This is an ongoing observation of ours that we need to continue to determine, but it's that businesses, consumers, clients of businesses, they are evaluating more actively. And so I would suggest that, yes, everybody's looking for the best deal possible that makes them feel the safest possible, and that meets their requirements in terms of their bottom lines, whether it's their personal bottom line or their business bottom line. So yes, I think a business relationship evaluation is ongoing.
I would echo that, Andrea. That's really insightful. The modeling we're doing is we're anticipating a spike in attrition rates in many professional service relationships, and it comes back to engagement. Like we have one third of the Canadian population is evaluating changing one of the most difficult relationships to change, and that's their financial service partner. Because to change your financial service partner, you have to unwind and unravel so many things. And one of the reasons for this, and importantly, and it's interesting, it's actually connected to a demographic cohort. When you get to midlife, there's everything, the level of routinization that we have and we exhibit with our professional relationships is very normal. Like it's on autopilot. So we get to a point now, change is thrust upon us. Therefore, the receptivity to a counter offer is heightened. And so from an attrition perspective, again, I'm sorry to close my thought, financial services, it's 1/3 are anticipating to change or add a relationship. One of the most difficult relationships to switch. So
that's a risk and an opportunity.
Risk and exactly, yeah. Thank you for that. I really don't like the reference, but putting fences around your existing relationships has never been so important. Retention is a key consideration for sure.
Well, and I think one of the things that's become obvious is the virtual component has meant that people can, your own staff can work from anywhere, your own clients can be anywhere. You're not, having to get onto, and I think this is, will go back. I think many people like, I'm one of them. The personal interaction is, you can feel a room a lot better when you're in a room as opposed to staring at the screen. I'm firmly convinced of that, but it's not all or nothing. And I think that there's going to be times where you say, I can service a client in Calgary from Waterloo. I'm sure, if we asked you for your client list, you've got clients all over the country. It will, you'll be able to do some of it this way, as well as getting on a plane or driving in a car and going to see somebody. And that's a shift. But I think the relationship both with your own employees and your customers and your suppliers, it seems to me, and I think what I hear from and seeing most of those graphs is everything has changed. The question is, to what degree and on what subject matters? And I don't know that we have the answer to that, which is why getting some of the survey work that you're doing, which is kind of, you do year over year, will show what those trends are. Okay, we're running out of time. We could go on all afternoon because I find it fascinating. But one of the things, and we touched on it a little earlier, and I wasn't necessarily in terms of the entrepreneur, but I've read about this, the great retirement. Like, lots of people just saying, you know what, I was on the edge of whether to retire for whatever reason. They don't want to keep working and staring at a computer screen, or they're not comfortable going back to work, or they don't want to go back to the commute. But so that's on the employee side. How has it changed for the entrepreneur, for the business owner? Like, succession planning is, they may not have done enough, but they probably in the back of their mind would say, I've been in the business now for 25 years. It's time for me to try and sell, or I do want to retire. How's COVID changed the succession planning or the exit strategy for many of the businesses?
This is kind of the elephant in the room, in a sense, that we have a significant shift now in those who are considering succeeding the business. So it's from our perspective, it's really interesting, and this is where help is required. And again, it's business owners. The entry point is looking at your business as an asset, and how do you treat that, and how do you maximize the valuation and those elements that go into a valuation of a business. So that could be EBITDA, could be MRR, or monthly recurring revenue, whatever that model is. But now you have, just like consumers, you have a more engaged business owner.
Yeah, I just think it's coming, and it has certainly spurred people to think about what's important to them. And you can see this. I think many business owners would say to me, their staff, or if you gave them a choice, many of them would say they'd never leave home again. They'd just as soon keep working remotely, because there's downsides to it, but not having to commute an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon, pretty appealing perk for folks to have. And so striking that balance is going to be really, really important. Listen, a last question, I'll let you go. If people want to find out more about PMG, and I know you've got some materials that people can look at, and the types of research how do they find out about you, and where do they look?
Oh, thank you so much, Ian. Very kind. PMGintelligence.com. Our company is, we talk about market research and behavioral analysis, but we're also in the business of predictive analytics and helping our partners, large, small, independents, maximize the value of your data. You're sitting on a gold mine, and many don't recognize that.
Listen, this has been fascinating. Thanks so much for joining us today, Rob and Andrea. Taking time out of your busy schedules. Somebody staring at the mountains and the ocean, Andrea, not to point you out, probably is missing what a gorgeous day we have in Ontario here, Rob. But thank you to both of you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks
Ian.
so much for
Appreciate
having
it.
us.
But that does bring us to the end of today's session. Thank you again to our title sponsor for the series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor of the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and finally to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, we do host a new Business Success Series session every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Next week, we'll be joined by Rose Masnak, Director of the Conestoga Entrepreneurship Collective, as she talks about how the college is helping people create new opportunities in the entrepreneurship, freelance, and sales economies, and work with businesses in the region to access talent. This will also mark the launch of a partnership between the Chamber and Conestoga College to help Chamber members access freelance talent on demand via the Conestoga Gig Marketplace, supplying young talent and helping businesses succeed in a changing workforce. To register and to find out more about other upcoming events, please follow us and visit greaterkwchamber.com. Please do share this series with your friends and colleagues. Join us every Wednesday afternoon for another edition of the Business Success Series, brought to you by Manulife. Because if it's Wednesday, it is the Business Success Series. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.